There was a little girl who drew a picture of a Bible story, and it was 3 people in a car, and a man driving, and a woman and a man in the back seat. And her mother said, "What's this a picture of?" And she said, "It's God driving Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden." Okay. She had heard that God had driven them out. So that in her mind was the way you drive somebody out of somewhere. Okay? Her cultural interpretation of that. And then there are the shortened expressions, and there's the good old English expression, jeet. You ever hear that expression? You know what that means? And I don't think anybody ever writes it, because it's not standard English, but if you did, I guess you could spell it like that. It usually comes in a question, and I know many of you have heard this, many of you have used it. Nobody recognize this? Huh? Yeah, it's a question. Cheat yet? Cheat yet? We shorten it. You understand that, Nikki? Cheat yet?
Okay.
Okay? Now, imagine somebody learning the language from that, something like that. You know, how do you spell jeet? Find out jeet yet. And obviously that's not the way to write it, and not the proper way to say it. That's not the way you learn it out of a book on learning English as a second language. But then you have the same problem learning somebody else's language, because they run words together like that. Constantly they run words together. They say them all together like they're all one word. Well, we do it the same way in English. But then there are the idiomatic expressions. Now, idiomatic expressions are not the things that idiots say. The things that everybody says. Idiomatic expressions. And we tend to forget that they are idioms. Okay? We tend to think that we're just saying it the way it's to be said. Okay? Like the way we talk about the heart. Okay? Loving God with the heart. Alright? How else do you say that? How else do you say, and even the whole heart, okay? You're supposed to love God with your whole heart. How else do you get that concept across? But that is not the way some cultures would say it. Okay? Some examples. I think this is from Hebert 2. The Khar people of French Equatorial Africa love with their livers. Okay? They feel love in their liver. Now you may say, well, that's not right. Love not from the liver, it's from the heart. Well, do we really think love comes from the physical heart? Not necessarily. We know that that's figurative. But how to express that in a different way. The Kanabs in Guatemala love with the abdomen. The Marshallese with the throat. And you can see how some of this might get connected with feelings that people have. You know, a person having feelings of love might get kind of choked up or feel a flutter in their throat. You know? And so you identify love with the throat. Or butterflies in your stomach, you know, this feeling that you may get from being in love. And so sorrow is expressed by the Habe of French West Africa as the liver being sick. Okay? We would say a person is heavy-hearted. Okay? They have a sick liver. The Bambara say the eye is black. Okay? So instead of saying he's heavy-hearted, he has a blackened eye. Okay? So they're talking about just the sense of darkness that a person has when they are depressed or sad. The Mossi say the heart is spoiled, or the Uduks say the stomach is heavy. Okay? And again, you can see how kind of where some of this will come from. If you're depressed, if you're miserable, maybe your stomach will feel heavy. You know? So, but those are figurative things. And just like we, might have trouble finding a different way to describe loving God with the whole heart, they're going to say this way. And it can cause misunderstandings. Let's imagine, say you're traveling in Sudan in a certain part, and you're traveling on a dirt road, and you come to a place where you get stuck in the mud. And so you need a shovel. And so you get out, and the guy that's with you knows the people in the area, so you point at this house. You say, let's go ask that guy if we can borrow a shovel. Okay? Now, here's his answer. There is no need to ask him. He is big-hearted. Okay? What would you take that sentence to mean? There's no need to ask him. He's big-hearted.
He's generous. Of course.
Okay. So you could almost even take it without asking because there's no need to ask, he's big-hearted. All right. But big-hearted, in that area of Sudan, means stingy. Because in their idea, a person with a big heart, what they mean is he's taken everything that he can. He holds everything to himself. And that's why he's big. His heart is swollen, basically. It's full because he never gives. Okay? So what he means is there's no need to ask him, there's no use to ask him because he's big-hearted, he's stingy. Okay? Now, you can see how that could lead to a wrong course of action if you misunderstand something. Okay? And you can even think that something is a compliment when it's not, it's a criticism. So when somebody says something to you about you, just thank them no matter what it is. And then you're safe either way, if it's a criticism or a compliment. I've heard that in Japan, and some of this is from a book by Nida. I've got that book with me, I'll show you. It was written 60 years ago, and so many of his illustrations of things that were going on in different places probably are not going on there now. Many of those things would have changed by now. But they're really interesting cultural pictures. And some things don't change real fast in some places. But he gave the example that in Japan, a girl wants to be sure that she looks like the general model of what a Japanese girl should look like. And so it's a common compliment when somebody sees a photograph that they touch up to help take out any distinctive characteristics to say, wow, she's beautiful, she looks just like anyone. Okay? Now, we wouldn't take that as a compliment, but used to at least, it would have been considered a compliment because she wants to look normal. She wants to look like others. So imagine our expressions like to say somebody has a screw loose, or they're a brick short, or something was the last straw. And see, some of these expressions they don't relate to anything we do now, like, or at least most of us. So the old story of the camel that was being loaded with hay or straw, and they kept putting on more and more and more and thinking, well, if you can carry this much, you can carry a little more, until finally they put on one more straw and it was too much and he collapsed under. That's where that story comes from. Well, we don't load straw on even, a few people, farmers might haul loads of straw on their trucks, but most of us are not in contact with that, and yet we would use that expression. We know what the expression means, that something was the last straw, you just couldn't take anymore, even though we don't know the origin of it, right? Yes.
There's two examples I can think of in Africa, where here it's not a bad thing if you say, oh, you're crazy. Over there, if you say you're crazy, you're literally calling them out of their mind. They are physically handicapped, and so they will literally fight you over you call, oh, you're crazy, and they will come after you. Or a compliment is actually, they'll say, oh, you're fat. And you're supposed to thank them for that because that means you can actually afford to eat. And so things that we don't think of, like, oh, he just called me fat, that's bad. Or, oh, you're crazy, that's a good, you're just joking around. But those are two that I can think of from Africa that are very different. Even though one seems negative, it's actually positive. And positive seems negative.
Right, the cultural ideal of being thin. Many people, they want to be thin in our culture, in American culture. Being thin is not a good thing in a lot of places. It's considered a person who does not have enough to feed themselves. And there are places too where, I know like in the inner city, being excessively thin sometimes was a mark of drug abuse. And so if somebody was excessively thin, you knew they were in bad shape. They were using drugs, they weren't eating very much. And so those things we assume we know what they mean sometimes. Yes.
I was gonna add on to that. This summer I got to go home, and it was funny. Like I went home and someone was like, "Oh, you're so fat."
Mm-hmm.
They took me home and they touched me because it was so funny.
Yeah.
And I was quiet for a while. And finally, my dad was like, "Maybe you should say something." It's like, "Thank you," but like it took some the wrong time to react to that.
Yeah. So you're having reverse culture shock. Yeah. And there are places where you're considered wealthy. I have an acquaintance who is enormously large, and he visited, I can't think where it was, the Philippines. People just swarmed around him because they thought he was wealthy, because he was immensely fat. And they were fascinated with that. Okay. So the idiomatic expressions, last straw. The expression "hang up your shingle." You know what that means? It's an old English idiom. What's it mean to hang up your shingle?
It means to set up shop in a particular place or camp.
All right, good. Shingle as in the sign for business. And I've heard that one misused, in fact, by no less of a great man than H.E. Smuel. I remember hearing him preach one time about a pastor getting really discouraged and just ready to hang up his shingle. In other words, to quit is what he meant. Hang up your shingle doesn't mean quit. It means start. Unless he meant the guy was going to leave the ministry and go into some other business, but I don't think that's not, wasn't what it sounded like what he meant. To be on the ropes. Anybody know that expression? To be on the ropes? What's that mean? Okay, to be, well, it's a boxing expression. When a person is on the ropes, when a boxer is on the ropes, what's that mean?
He's in trouble.
He's been battered back as far as he can go, and he's leaning against the ropes while his opponent is pounding him. So he's in a desperate position. And so people use the expression, he's on the ropes, meaning that he's in a desperate situation. He's about to lose unless he can really do something right really quick. Okay. There was a woman in Liberia who wanted to name her twins some really good names. And she had seen this medical pamphlet that had been circulated by some organization, and she didn't understand what it was about, but she saw two words in there that she thought would sound like really classy names. So she named her twin girls Syphila and Gonora. Okay. For those of you who don't know, those are two venereal diseases. So, Syphila and Gonora. Take your choice, I guess. So, that would, I knew of a woman who named her son O Theophilus, because where Luke says, I'm writing to you, O Theophilus, she thought the O was part of the name, so she named him after that.